Special call meeting on redistricting. Is that accurate enough? Okay, perfect. To order. So where'd Michelle go? You haven't quit yet, Michelle. Thank you so much for being here. I'll put you at the dais if that's okay.
While we're doing that, Michelle, thank you for everything.
Yeah, you've been awesome.
Done. And I just learned something that I did not know about Michelle that I think is really appropriate for the work that she has done in this process. Michelle, do you want to show everybody what's on your wrist? No, close.
I have a tattoo because I ended up in the landmine field when I was working doing government contracting in Bagram, Afghanistan. So
very cool.
So it is a landmine tattoo.
Landmine, you were prepared. This is nothing. So Fernando reminded me he does have a very brief presentation to update us on where we are.
Yes.
And then council, with your direction, what I think we need to do after Fernando's presentation is, actually you do that first and then we'll dive in. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Last night, the City Council held a public hearing to receive comments on maps V2 and V3, which you had selected at your most recent map drawing session as the basis for further discussion. And this afternoon, we'd like to review with you the results of that public hearing and subsequent work performed by members of the City Council to advance us toward a final map that you might be prepared to adopt. And so you heard from many interested residents last night, many speaking in person, others calling in, others submitting comments in writing. And we'd like to review those comments that you heard more than once from members of the public. I see that some of you have already noticed the final comment, which is probably the most appropriate of all. Como loves Councilmember Crane. Well-deserved, Councilmember. But the most common comment was that residents support map V3 with a so-called horseshoe amendment. Now, some of us had not even seen the horseshoe amendment until earlier today. Some won't even be seeing it until a moment from now. So that's why we're not asking you to take any action on the horseshoe amendment or on any other map this afternoon. We'd like to present to you what we've received from members of the council so that you might determine whether or not it warrants further consideration. But 25 of the comments that you received last night, by far the largest number, pertain to support for map V3 with that horseshoe amendment. Another 14 comments expressed support for map V3 without reference to that amendment. You also heard from at least 5 residents their desire to create a strong Southside Hispanic district with a voting age population of 55% or more. Some actually stated 55% explicitly, others may have implied a figure to that effect. Now, some who've expressed a preference for map V3 or V3 with the horseshoe amendment also made reference to the Southside Hispanic District. So these comments, in a sense, are cumulative in nature. Many individuals actually expressed more than one comment, and you can see them reflected in these results. You also heard from at least 4 speakers that they favor the inclusion of Como in District 6, and you've heard that comment many times in recent weeks. You heard at least 4 individuals express support for the idea of independent redistricting, even though that is not an issue on the table for discussion today. You heard from some representatives of neighborhoods north of Loop 820 that they would support greater balance in the population of various districts north of Loop 820 so as to accommodate growth in that part of Fort Worth. You'll recall that as a general rule, this is not a legal requirement, this is not even a formal adopted criterion, but as a general rule, it's a good practice, all things being equal, to set the population for the fast-growing districts, such as those north of Loop 820, below the average population for all districts. And conversely, it's best, if possible, to set the population of the slower-growing districts above the average. Because by the end of the next decade, the faster-growing districts will grow so fast that they will far exceed the average and far exceed the slower growing districts. And therefore, why not start at a lower level so that over time it will create more balance? That's the argument made by representatives from the neighborhoods north of Loop 820. We also heard that the Ridgemar neighborhood would like to stay in District 3. We heard that Worth Heights would like to stay in District 9. And we also received a handful of other comments, but these are the ones upon which two or more residents spoke last night. Now, we've received this horseshoe map, as you see depicted on the screen. It's called the horseshoe map because if you think abstractly about a horseshoe or an arch, you can see how different segments of District 11, as depicted on this map, can be connected by means of a narrow corridor that extends along I-35, the South Freeway, and the railroad tracks just to the west of that freeway, whereby we can connect Riverside all the way down to Worth Heights and other neighborhoods along the Hemp Hill corridor. We took this map 3 horseshoe and evaluated it with respect to the comments that you heard last night. And we see that, of course, it satisfies the comments about map V3 with the horseshoe amendment and map V3 generally. Arguably, the horseshoe map addresses the interests of those who favor a strong South Side Hispanic district with a high voting age population, in this case 58%.
Fernando, can you point out the horseshoe? I just
Yes.
want to see it.
As I say, you have to think abstractly. Here's District 11. And it wraps around, it extends on the other side of District 8 to capture Worth Heights around the Grand Plaza.
Okay.
That's an exercise in creative mapping. So those are the ways in which the horseshoe map corresponds to the comments that you heard most commonly at the public hearing last night. Here you can see a closer look, Ms. Bivens, at District 11 as proposed. And you can see it wraps around District 8 and comes down to include Worth Heights. So that's a closer look.
It actually includes like 3 different neighborhoods: Worth Heights, Rosemont, and then Brentwood.
It includes a large portion of Rosemont.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Fernando, where's Rosemont split on that? Could you read that street?
It looks like the railroad track. Here you can see I-35. It actually includes property just east of the freeway as well.
Yeah, that's the Echo Lake piece.
Echo Lake, where Worth Heights Community Center
Yes.
is located. And here you can see the demographic data corresponding to map 3 Horseshoe. And among other things, you can see in respect to Hispanic voting age population, 58% for that District 11 and 62.5% for District 2. Again, this map is seeking to do what many residents favored at the council public hearing last night, which is to create 2 Hispanic opportunity districts with a very high percentage, 55% or more, voting age population, sufficient to constitute a strong Hispanic opportunity district. And I thought it might be good to pause for a moment and address the issue of balancing district populations to accommodate growth north of Loop 820, because this is one of the issues that the neighborhoods north of the Loop have voiced to the council for your consideration. We've highlighted 3 districts, numbers 4, 7, and 10, which are located predominantly north of Loop 820 in the Horseshoe map. And you can see if the average population of each of the 10 districts is 91,891, you can see that these 3 fast-growing districts, 4, 7, and 10, are all well above the average. Plus 4.4%, plus 3.3%, and plus 4.4%. Well above the average, whereas some of the slower-growing districts actually are below the average. You can see districts 2, 8, 2, 6, 8, and 9 have populations that are significantly below the average. Nothing wrong with that from a legal standpoint or from the standpoint of the adopted criteria. But as a general rule of thumb, you do want to start the fast-growing districts below the average, slower-growing districts above the average. So these are the data that corroborate those comments.
I think Jared has a question.
Yeah, I think that, there's a really important caveat here, knowing that during the census, communities of color struggled significantly with getting counts on the census. And therefore, there's a severe undercount in which all the communities of color that you mentioned, or predominantly, or the districts that serve predominantly communities of color, we know have severe undercounting. And so I would argue that if you considered those undercounts in this number, it would be balanced.
I'll add something to that, Fernando.
Yes, sir.
This is a great point that you are making. And also in our retreat last week, we did see the graph that shows that there's going to be significant growth far south as well.
Yes.
So maybe not as much as the north, but there's going to be significant growth far south.
Yes.
And just in the process of working diligently with these maps and with the software, one of the issues that came across, and I wanted to make it very clear for all people that live in North Fort Worth and those that represent it, when you have the community of interests and trying to keep them together and the population of them living there, it was hard to decrease their population and keep them intact.
Yes.
So that was one of the issues that we did face as it relates to North Fort Worth. And so we went with the community of interest versus trying to give them a lower population.
Yes.
And
Yes,
just for speaking, I think that was a great thing to do for the city of Fort Worth.
That's a great point, Councilmember Nettles. Even with District 4, the way it was drawn, it was almost to the T the way our neighbors up north asked for it to be, which necessitated the way that map was drawn. So great point.
I think we can comment briefly on all those points. Yes, it is true that historically, persons of color do tend to be undercounted by the census. By how much, it's hard to say. but that is a general trend.
Yeah, what's the source of that information?
I think it's well documented, and we'd be happy to provide you with citations.
Yeah, isn't the census generally thought to be universally imperfect?
It's obviously not a perfect count.
Correct.
We strive for accuracy, obviously.
Sure.
And
Across all populations.
across all population groups.
And there is inaccuracy throughout, correct?
There is some degree of imperfection throughout the
Let's
census.
be clear
Yes.
on that.
Yeah, I think we recognize that disparities exist in data sets, though.
Yes.
And I mean, it's worth a data dive.
So I
to-
guess you can choose which data set you want to use.
No, I think the Census Bureau has fairly good estimates about the undercounts. We have a lot of great folks here in the city of Fort Worth who've worked on this issue for decades, one being Rodney Stanley, who has done a lot of work all across the country on census counts. And I know that was why, me, Councilmember Nettles, Councilmember Flores, and Councilmember Bivens during the census counts, we're working so hard to get communities of color out, because there are disparities between census counts.
Now, we are obligated by the U.S. Constitution to base redistricting upon the actual count, not upon any modified version of the count.
Sure.
Let me say as well that even though the comment about accommodating growth happens to have been voiced by leaders of neighborhoods from north of Loop 820, other parts of Fort Worth are growing rapidly as well, not just north of Loop 820. So far west around Walsh Ranch, far south around Tarleton State, those areas and others are likely to experience rapid growth as well during the next decade, and that's what the forecast from the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which we discussed at your retreat last week, tend to indicate. Finally, I would say...
Can I just make one more comment?
Yes, please.
So to your comment, Chris, I wouldn't want this group to believe, or at least the people I represent up north, to feel like we've done them any favors in how this has been mapped out, because I think their fear, and it's certainly a realistic one, is they're going to be back in the same position they were 10 years ago, where they're being disenfranchised because population growth is at the pace it's going. So we can bake that into a certain extent, but in the way this is looking, they're going to be back in the same position, which has caused a lot of quality of life issues and a lot of pain points for families up there.
The final comment I want to make in reference to Councilor Nettles' point is that it is true, and I think this is a point we've been making from the very beginning of the redistricting process. It is virtually impossible to satisfy all criteria, all concerns, all interests simultaneously to ensure that everybody's objectives are met. It is virtually impossible to do so. It is ultimately a choice, a public policy choice that the city council is elected to make about priorities and about how you balance competing interests. And which is not to say that we're at the end of the process. We're not. But I think this horseshoe map does provide a basis for discussion, not the only basis, but a basis for discussion that could lead you toward a consensus about the final map that you want to consider for adoption. And so the only steps formally that we have scheduled for the weeks ahead include a final map drawing session, which you've placed on your calendars for Tuesday, March 22nd, and the regular council meeting on March 29th, when you would be able to adopt the final map that you produce. You're not bound by these dates, but these are the dates that you've set. And what you may wish to do this afternoon and between now and the 22nd is entirely up to you. So I'd be happy to entertain any additional questions, Madam Mayor, I would be remiss if I didn't point out some of the folks who are with us today. You've already acknowledged Michelle Swindle, who has done extraordinary work over the course of many months, making this process look halfway intelligent when we've been laboring in conditions that could be described as chaotic. And of course, you have our Deputy City Attorney, Leanne Guzman, and our esteemed outside counsel from Bickerstaff, Mr. Philip Arnold, who's here from Austin and available to answer any legal questions you may wish to pose.
Fernando, I just want to add to that discussion point. I think Jared brought that up, about communities of color having histories of being, undercounted. Within that, again, the point of repetition, especially where Hispanics are concerned, because of that portion of that population being undocumented, adds yet another factor to consider. And I'm not going to, jump into what that factor should be. Quantitatively, it's very difficult to ascertain. But the takeaway would be that, whatever percentages that you arrive at, you would have to factor something in terms of a consideration to have a higher number, generally speaking. And then also, like Leonard, I represent currently folks, north of Loop 820. And I've heard from them separately as groups, as alliances. We, as a council, have to balance a lot of factors going in here. And it's tricky at times and difficult most times. Growth is certainly, one factor that we need to keep in mind. So, I've heard from them loud and clear. I know what their, concerns are. 3 of them were there last night at least, that I recognized, who were representing larger groups.
I think that's a fair point, Carlos, because I think in total yesterday or last night we had 61 people, I think 61 voiced their opinion, many of which were individual opinions. But I know at least in 2 cases, the folks representing the North represent thousands of people. And that can't be dismissed, nor can last night's presenters be used as an argument to make universal change, simply because they were there.
Go ahead and
Go ahead, Chris.
and add something. And I just really want us to, again, to focus on how we got to where we are today. We had to reschedule a couple of meetings or postpone or push them back because we hadn't satisfied the second Hispanic district. And if we get now that we have got to a satisfaction of, or at least to a compromise or to closer than we have ever been before, we can't come to a table with now another argument. And I know population has been an issue, but if we put 2 new districts far north, then there will be no second Hispanic Opportunity District. And so I don't even think that's even a real, it's a discussion we can have, but it would completely dilute the opportunity to have a second Hispanic district, which our amendment or our task force or whatever you want to call it come up with those recommendations that we also have 2 strong Hispanic districts as well as trying to keep the minority districts that we have together. And again, I truly believe most of us have been here for 7 months, and I think each council person have done a great job to represent the district, which, Leonard, you have the largest district now, but I think we all have done a great job representing those districts. And so I just really want us to focus on why we got to where we are today, to come to a consensus. And I think from hearing people who spoke last night from District 8, a lot of them did not speak individually. I had a group of people who were in a house together, at least about 5 or 10 of them, listening to the meeting. They gave one phone number to call in, and when one person had an issue with the phone, they stopped answering, and because they felt intimidated of what to say. And so I will argue as well is that the people who came south forward did not speak for just themselves, but they spoke for representation of the 108,000 people that I service in District 8.
Elizabeth.
The definition of disenfranchise is to deprive someone of the right to vote or to deprive someone of power to marginalize them, to deprive them of a right or privilege. And I think that we have all spent months now. We have spent hours of grueling public comment. Some of that has been very hard to hear for many of us here on council. I think it is safe to say that it has been the goal of this council to prevent any disenfranchisement from any population across this city. I don't care what you look like, what language you speak, where you live. That is what we have wrestled with as a community and as a council for months. I think it is fair to say that a lot of the comments that we have heard from residents when they speak about not having a voice are feeling disenfranchised. And quite frankly, many of them have been historically disenfranchised. And not because we didn't build roads, but because we have quite literally taken away their right to vote at times in our history. We have, and correct, we still do that today as a community. We've seen that happen across the country. We have all inherited the sins of the people that came before us. Whether you did not represent a community that didn't look like you, didn't live near you, you were not responsive to a neighborhood's need for growth. We have all inherited the missteps of anyone that came before us. And it's our job to fix it. And that is what I think we're doing here today, is we're trying to fix it. And so I understand, Leonard, where you have heard from the North that they have not felt well represented. We certainly heard from the South yesterday that they have not felt well represented for decades. It's our job to draw a map for today. It is our job to draw a map for all of Fort Worth that, to the best of our ability, makes it as fair as possible. It is also our job to represent each and every person in our district to the best of our ability, no matter what neighborhood they live in or what community they come from. And that lines don't fix. That is what elections fix. And so to the extent that people in the North felt disenfranchised or people in the South felt disenfranchised, we are drawing lines to give them an equal opportunity to speak their mind and to fix that problem on their own.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Gina?
I'll be very, very brief. It is a blessing, but also a curse when cities back in the 80s and 90s annexed in every direction as far as they could. And I saw that happen. I reported on that happening. It happened. People buy land and property where they choose, assuming infrastructure is going to be there. And we have proven that we can't keep up with the growth. But when you take a look at other communities that have been disenfranchised and omitted, just literally not even recognized for decades, how do you find that balance? And so you won't get a perfect world, but at the end of this process, we're going to have a map. Somebody's not going to be happy. Somebody's not going to be, it's just not going to be perfect for everyone. And so at some point in time, we've got to figure out how to continue working together. I have seen relationships frayed, and that's been very, very uncomfortable for me because it just shows how passionate we are. But you're not going to make everybody north of the loop happy. We're not going to make everybody south of the loop happy. I even go all the way east to the airport. They're not going to be happy. That's real. But we got elected for a reason. Got to make some decisions. got to do it quick, got to make it happen and move on to the next fight. So that's what I share with you guys. It's just not going to be pretty. So stop striving for pretty. It's going to be an ugly pig, okay? But at the end of the day, we'll do it again in 10 years. We will all be gone. But do not think for any reason that you're going to make people happy. It's not going to happen.
Thank you, Gina. Fernando, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Very helpful. So I'll just throw a few things out here that I think are important. The first is lots of discussion about a horseshoe map, which is great. I have not seen a map until today. And so I think what is necessary is for Michelle to stand up and show what's been given to us, but here's some caveats. I would suspect that the versions of horseshoe maps are different. And I know that Carlos probably has a few things that he wants to interject on with a map we pull up here. And we need to talk about what, if any, of those versions. The other thing that is not on our tables is version 2 that Councilmember Moon had put together that was here last week. Fine if there's a consensus around the table, if that's not, we can't really get a horseshoe out of that map. But I'm just putting that out there that by no means has there been a decision that map's off the table. I think that staff was just attempting to react to a need for amendments based on conversations with the community. Here's how I see it. We have a balance of a lot of factors. You've got growth, you've got a need for representation, and you're not going to make everybody happy. And so it is really important to me that we don't lose sight of that. And I am prepared today to help us get to one map. We're not going to vote on anything. There's no agenda item, but it's more a consensus around the table so that we can make a plan for additional public meetings, if any other additional map drawing sessions or whatever else we want to do before the end of this month. Because I think the public really needs something to draw off of. I've turned numerous times to Councilmember Flores as a representative from the Hispanic community. I know you're channeling a lot of voices, Carlos, but we really do need to try to make some decisions around this table today. But I want everyone to feel, no one's shy, open about all the things that are been said and then some to get us to a place where we feel like we can support something today. I do feel very strongly, and I think I said this last week, that we have to create a Hispanic Opportunity District in the south of Fort Worth. And I wish there was a way to do both, to create an additional district in the north. I just don't see how you do that. And so that's the big decision we have to make. And I know that Councilmember Moon is not here today, but I do think he deserves a lot of credit for working really hard and map drawing and trying to build consensus around something in the north. But in the end, I think we're really, and y'all can disagree with me, that's okay. I'm just telling you where I feel and the people I have talked to ad nauseum at this point. So
I don't mind sharing an opinion. And I adore Kerry. The public sentiment I've heard is, since we know that he is leaving the council, there are some who have expressed concern that he's been so aggressively involved. One thing that's important to me is we got to have a cutoff point. And I just want to know, is anybody still working on a map that's going to show up to me in my mailbox Friday? I'm tired of getting all these new versions. And so we have to have an agreement, cut off, no more. And so if there's still editing going on, at least let's have transparency and have that stated, because I don't want any more weekend calls. I don't want any more weekend emails. I don't want people saying, have you seen this map? I haven't seen anything. And so we got to have a cutoff date.
yeah. Michelle, why don't you pull up the map that we're looking at here? It's a horseshoe, and try to zoom in on it. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
If I can somewhat walk council through the changes that were made in this map, because these changes were made to District 9. To get here, we had to cut into the hospital district, which is something that I feel very strongly as a city we should have kept together. We also cut into the near south side overlay, which again, I think as a city is something that was very important to keep together. But voices were heard, and it became very clear that a Hispanic district that only sat on the east side of Fort Worth would not work. So we brought that down. We used mostly railroad tracks and neighborhood lines to create that bridge that it was called, or arc, to get down to the south side. It goes along that railroad track so that it doesn't just have a freeway, but there are some parcels of land and humans that live there. It goes down into Worth Heights and the majority of Rosemont. We could not get all of it because of population balances, and to try to get to a map that compromises, we wanted to have as little disruption in the other districts as possible, which is why you see what it looks like today. It also goes over to the east side of 35 to keep Worth Heights together with Brentmore and the Echo Lake area, because that is, those two communities are connected, and they share their community center, and they have a long history together. So that's how we got to that particular compromise that had minimal impacts on the districts around it, where we have already kind of settled on those lines, but made some significant changes to get us to plus 55. And I think 58 is something that we should all be proud of. That's certainly upwards of 55. We didn't shoot for the minimum here. And so that's really the most significant changes to the map.
That's helpful, Elizabeth. A few things, obviously, that one big one is the division of Rosemont along the railroad track. Reaction to that, we worked really hard to keep COIs together, fully understand why in this map, but I think we need to call that out first. Did you have something, Carlos?
Yeah, Elizabeth and I spoke briefly about that. I know that, all of us, are trying to work to find, compromises that, we can build on and all that. Just a general concern, and, I haven't spoken to Rosemont. I don't know how they feel about that. That's why I was just asking again. I know she had told me where the split occurred, and
I can speak for Rosemont because I represent them currently.
okay, well, that's why I'm saying I'm not speaking for them. I'm just concerned.
In one of the previous map that you had presented, there was a portion of Rosemont that was cut off.
7% of the entire area.
Correct, in a mostly commercial area. It took it to McCart instead of the railroad track. I did speak with Rosemont about that specific amendment, and the sentiment was it's mostly commercial, and there is a strong interest in Rosemont to create a second Southside Opportunity District. It does cut into some of the Rosemont neighborhood, and again, that is not perfect, but it gets us to where we need to be without drastically changing this map. And so you heard me speak out against it. You've heard me speak out a lot about splitting up neighborhoods, but we are at the point now where we are splitting hairs to get where we need to be. And so I imagine there will be some consternation with it. But as Councilwoman Bivens stated earlier, this isn't going to be pretty for everyone, and we're not going to make everyone happy.
All right. One other, area that you asked me to look at, going to the Panther Island area. Most of Panther Island is in D2. You propose taking a large portion of that and putting it in D9. Now, right now, at the current progress of the project, there's very little population, with the exception of those new persons that have signed leases in Encore. For the benefit of the new council members who have been here, even before I was a council member, I was involved in giving community feedback on the course of that project. You know, now as a council member on the TRVA Board of Directors, and I think we all know that project, you know, has had its difficulties and it's at a better place now, thank goodness. But from the very inception, it started out with the intention to reuse, you know, that area of the north side into something that could benefit that underserved